picking up on our stone plant corruptor badge hunting. So this is probably going to be a boring stream. Alright. So we're going to go with this one. Endless Sunday, Volume 1 from 2020. No idea what it's going to sound like. But we'll just get it playing in the background so there's something. Check our badge checklist, and I think I'm heading... Okay, I'm going to head towards Rickety Warzone first. I'm going to need to bring up the map because just in case you're wondering why it's saying only affecting self, I am running speed phase. I can still be attacked, but I can just run through enemies. Instead, I'm just going to get hung up on all the geometry. Yep. Can I run through a pylon? No, I can't actually run through a pylon, but I can run around it. Here we go. It is name. On kind of a side note while I'm over here, uh, City of Villains was often criminally, uh, no pun intended, actually, underdeveloped, in that you have this huge facility over here, and I'm assuming it's supposed to be either some kind of holding tank or some kind of centrifuge. I'm not entirely sure what was or is supposed to be here, what this is, but there's a lot of this kind of infrastructure that's around. Uh, this is in Mercy Island. There's this infrastructure here, and there's almost no information over why it's here, who's using it, what's the purpose. And there's on villain side, there's an entire series of arcs over the power transfer system and how uh I think it's Dr. Aeon. No, not Dr. Aeon. It's one of the villainous doctors in the game is using the demon held below Capo Diablo to power the rest of the Arachnos infrastructure. And it's a very well done arc. A lot of the writing done villain side is actually very well done, but there's just so little of it. In all the missions, and this is going back all the way to the start, and it was changed up a bit to kind of simplify the flow and get players to the rogue and vigilante stages where they would. I just got stuck. Yeah, yes, I can. To simplify. Okay, here's one of the big things. Funding for City of Heroes, City of Villains, basically determined by player population. Where was the subscription money actually going to? And while City of Villains had a number of players who picked the game up, most of those players who picked up City of Villains were also City of Heroes players. And because they were also City of Heroes players, that meant the vast bulk of their characters were hero side. The vast bulk of their in-game ability to generate wealth was hero side. Because City of Villains never got there was no way for villain players to catch up to a hero player who had several issues and uh, a massive amount of time. No way to really close that gap. So City of Villains could never really take off as a separate game because the assets and resources between characters on an account were split. You couldn't take infamy from the villain side and use it as influence on the hero side, and so on and so forth. You couldn't send enhancements back and forth. You couldn't send recipes back and forth. Because of the complete split in the economies, most players had an incentive, not just beyond the writing, but to not really leave their hero account because their heroes were where they could actually go and do things. And villain side was really just a distraction. Yes, you had some interesting power sets and story arcs and everything on villain side, but there was no impetus, no purpose, no reason, nothing to really dedicate an avatar to playing villain side, and showed up in the traffic records and the as to put it gently, the tunnels in the hollows, they are actually a separate zone. They are only accessed. Were no missions. There may be a mission or two now that has a hunt down in the tunnels, but for the most part the tunnels would only be accessed by players who were running the, if I can look it up here, under trials, the Caverns of Transcendence as started by Karsus. That was the only time that players would ever be entering the tunnels under the hollows. And that was simply because that's where the mission was located for that trial. So, keeping that in mind, the tunnels got more player traffic daily combined over an entire year than any one PvP zone. Actually, the tunnels got more traffic than all the PvP zones combined. And to make matters worse, the total villain traffic, as in a number of players who were consistently playing villains on a regular basis, as measured over time, the number of logins, amount of time in game, a single low-level zone in on the hero side, King's Row, I believe, had more players, more people going in and out of the zone over the course of a year than all of the villain zones combined. And that's the key thing when people talk about player counts and experience content, that you don't measure those metrics by the players that actually are paying for subscriptions or bought the game. You measure it by the players who are actually logging in and accessing zones. How often are these zones loaded up? Because that information can be tracked, and because most players who bought City of Villains were City of Heroes players, and thus these subscriptions, a large percentage, I want to say something like 79-80% of the initial City of Villains subscriptions were just City of Heroes subscriptions. They were just players who already playing the game who went out and bought it. City of Villains didn't actually bring in a whole lot of new players who had never played City of Heroes before. And that's kind of a crucial metric to keep in mind. It did bring in some, but it wasn't a large amount, and many players who, and again, this is based on actual traffic statistics, uh, the players who purchased City of Villains, and that was their entry to the game, many of them were based on traffic estimates, were looking at the game, were visiting the website, were registering interest, were trying to participate in the beta. And because of that, a large percentage of that remaining percentage of people who didn't have City of Heroes were using City of Villains as their buy-in to City of Heroes. They got new content, they weren't buying, and this is something that basically can be tracked from the time City of Villains was announced to City of Villains has actually launched. In the player growth or lack thereof, there is a substantial decline in player growth as the villains go through the beta process and actually comes out and released, and then the pick back up. And that's where a large number of those new players came from, not from players who were buying City of Villains, but from players who were buying into City of Heroes and City of Villains in one shot, rather than buying City of Heroes and then having to buy City of Villains again. Now, this is complicated by, well, didn't they have a separate version? Yeah, there was a separate retail presence, but the caveat here is that a number of retailers bundled the two games together before City of Heroes Good and Evil Edition. And that may be something you can look up on Paragon Wiki. But it's like I walked into a Best Buy and they had City of Villains and City of Heroes shrink wrapped together, same box, and you bought City of Villains and you got City of Heroes a disc alongside of it. Now, I don't know how widespread that promotion was. I don't know how many retailers actually did that. I just know of the retailers where I was at the time, which were Best Buy, Walmart, GameStop, a little place called Rhino Games. I don't think it was a franchise. And Rhino Games was the only one I know of that didn't have a shrink wrap deal. But walked into Best Buy, they had it. GameStop had a shrink wrap, the boxes for COV and COH together, and Walmart had a shrink wrap COH and COV together. So I don't know how widespread that was, but that was something I did see where I was at. I don't know if that was nationwide, local, don't have that kind of information, but it is a factor to keep in mind. Now, the reason why this is important is that as time goes on and you look at the player populations where players are, NCSoft as a publisher would only release funds that would result in a return on investment. And a significant problem in game development is that not everything that you do as a game developer has an immediate return on investment. It just doesn't. There's quality of life functions where you make things easier for players, where you fix bugs, where you may introduce new content, but it's not going to draw in new players. It's not going to increase the number of subscriptions. But from the player's perspective, that's what they're paying the subscription price for. They are paying for the developer to make new content. But NCSoft, as a publisher, didn't approach it like that. They didn't approach the subscription as paying for new content. They approached the subscription as maintaining the servers. And we know now that NCSoft happily threw hardware at any problem. There was never a software fix, just throw more hardware at it. So kind of keeping that in mind, NCSoft was not necessarily mismanaging an MMORPG, but they had a completely separate view of how the game was to be managed than a player on the other side of that, who's kind of going, and players can look at server hardware costs and kind of go, with these new Athlon 64s coming in the market that are going into the Hammer processors that are going into Opterons, and with the increase in Opterons in the market, you don't necessarily need a Xeon you don't have to pay Xeon prices to have the hardware needed to support this kind of game. So as hardware prices are falling, but NCSoft is spending more on hardware, it causes question from the consumer side of where is our subscription money being spent, because it's not being spent on content. It's not being spent on fixing bugs. It's what are we as the consumer paying for. It's one of the reasons why some people say that the subscription model failed. No, the subscription model didn't fail. Microsoft doing a bang-up job with the Xbox Game Pass Ultimate. And part of that is because Microsoft does understand that with a subscription, you are paying for the subscription service. You are paying for the development of content. You're not paying for the maintenance and the server upkeep. You're not paying the hardware costs, you're paying for the development of content. And since Microsoft has wrapped their heads around that, that's how they are approaching the funding. They're using Xbox Game Pass to fund content development, paying developers to make games, paying developers to release games out of the subscription funds. That's how a subscription service probably should work. You pay for the development of content, you don't pay for new hardware, and then pay for the development of content through expansion packs. But that was how NCSoft saw it, is they saw that you paid for content through expansion packs, and you paid through content through re-releases, and you paid through content through new subscribers. You didn't pay for new content or addressing current content through the subscription price. And there was another vendor who had that same problem, Sega and Phantasy Star Online, where Sega did not see that paying for a Hunter's license as a development of content. They saw that paying for a Hunter's license as covering the cost of hardware. Now in 1999, fair point, the subscription price toward paying for the maintenance server, hardware upkeep, probably a very fair point to be made that maybe that wasn't necessarily a bad business model, even if it wasn't maybe the best business model. So kind of the reason we go down that content is to go down that context is to understand why City of Villains was never really developed. And it's because it never had the player base, because sales numbers are separate. Sales and subscription numbers are separate from player traffic. Player traffic can be measured. Sales and subscriptions are ongoing or one time and are not necessarily a measure or indicator of what actually is going on with the game. Case in point, if you have 500 people who buy a game and then never actually log into that game, you've made 500 sales, but you did not gain 500 new players. And probably the king that everyone can think about right now who had that happen was Bethesda and Fallout 76. Yes, I bought Fallout 76, but when it wasn't available on Steam on 0 day with the code that I have, and I had to use the Bethesda launcher to get into Fallout 76, I just didn't bother. Yeah, I bought a game, but I never actually logged in. And I know I wasn't the only one, because it was a common topic of discussion in a number of the IRC channels that I was in at the time, at a number of the gaming forums I was in at the time. There were a lot of other players who were commenting that They pre-ordered Fallout 76, and when it actually launched and it wasn't exactly what they thought it was going to be, they maybe logged in once but then didn't play it. So you have these players who bought Fallout 76, ran up the sales records, but weren't actually in game actually playing it. So you have two separate uh you wind up with is dichotomy. I think dichotomy is the appropriate word to use here. You have a dichotomy of player expectations or experiences in what the sales numbers say are not a reflection of what actually happened. And it's kind of an important factor to keep in mind, especially when looking at other games or looking historically. City of Villains could never gain a larger audience. It could never extrapolate on the world that had been built. You could never have stories that explained why the Arachnos built their fortresses like they do. There's no explanation of why Arachnos took over these towns other than they took over these towns. There's just a number of unresolved plot threads, and because NCSoft did not approach the development as subscription for funding further development, but as expansion passes and player traffic determine development, you run into a catch-22. City of Villains couldn't gain new players because the developers were not allowed to develop the content that would gain new players. Yeah, if that sounds like circular reasoning, that's because it is circular reasoning. You have a causation that generates a causation that generates a causation that generates a causation that loops back and generates a causation. You can't get new players, or you can't get funding for new content because you can't get new players because you don't have content and you can't develop new content. Yeah, when your publisher forces you into that kind of development cycle, you've got an awful publisher. Now, to be fair to NCSoft, I have not played any of their recent games. I genuinely don't know if this is still how they approach development. I genuinely don't know if years of getting shellacked and losing money and kind of being a laughingstock, if at some point they kind of realized, you know what, maybe we've got our development priorities backwards. I don't know that. I can extrapolate. No, that did not go well. I can extrapolate that the lack of NCSoft having any notable success, and that I can't think of a single game on Xbox or PlayStation or Nintendo Switch or Steam right now that is NCSoft published and backed. And I don't mean a pre-existing title, I mean a completely new property and a new development house or a new backing. NCSoft just has not been making noise as a publisher for a long while now. Part of that may be due to the COVID scandemic and the controls that South Korea has put in place. I don't know. But it is something that modern publishers need to keep in mind, and it's something that Microsoft, or at least Phil Spencer at Microsoft, seems to have observed and learned the appropriate lesson, while Sony doesn't really seem to have groped what people are paying for. I have severe concerns about the upcoming merging of PlayStation Plus and PlayStation Now, because I am not convinced that Sony quite understands why Xbox Game Pass is working. And Xbox Game Pass is working because it is a subscription service that is paying for content development. It's not necessarily paying for sales of hardware. It's not necessarily paying for games. If you want a game that is on Game Pass and you want to keep it in your library, you can still buy it out of Game Pass for a discount. So you can still buy a game on Game Pass. But all of that subscription money is still of portions of it are being sent to developers. And there are a number of developers who have independent or maybe, excuse me for a second. I mean, we'll pick on the Medium for a second. The Medium is not the kind of game that I would go out of my way to purchase or buy. It's an interactive walking simulator with some puzzles, many of which could just be brute forced. And in some cases, I did brute force one or two puzzles because there wasn't a clear logic train on how you were supposed to solve the puzzle or get the information to solve the puzzle. Uh, but the Medium is a compelling narrative experience. Now, I'm not convinced that the developers behind Medium need to be handed control of Silent Hill after their display, because when it comes to Silent Hill, I expect some form of world interaction. I expect some form of combat, some form of being able to retaliate against an impressive force against me. And this may not necessarily be the correct interpretation of what Silent Hill is supposed to be or is intended to be. But as a survival horror franchise, and use that term loosely, where you are swapping back and forth between two worlds, uh, the Silent Hill games that I can remember, there was some form of combat. There was something for the player to do in game rather than just walk around. There, now that may be because I've really only remember recent Silent Hill games. And by recent, I mean younger than the original PlayStation version. But that's why I'm not really sure that the Medium developers are prepared to run a game like Silent Hill that, at least from the collective, or at least my memory of it, I expect a significant amount more world interaction than than the Medium offers. I also expect far more intricate puzzles actually making use of the separate realities, where you have to do something in one reality that firmly inflicts something on the other reality. And okay, for all the reality switching the Medium does, it doesn't. It is the Medium. Okay, if you've played Metroid, uh, pick any Metroid, and you've gotten all the way to, say, Craig, or you've gotten all the way to, say, Ridley. At this point, you pretty much presume in most Metroid games where these characters appear that you are significantly deep into the game. You probably have a significant number of power-ups. You have a non-insignificant number of advancements, capabilities. You've also have a non-insignificant amount of the map explored. And then you find out that in order to proceed, you have to go all the way back to a starting area. So then you have to backtrack through the game, go all the way back to where you started, and then pick up from there. Metroid Prime, it has some very good examples of this. As you go through Metroid Prime early on, you see a U-shaped tunnel. Now, if you've played Metroid Prime before, you already know that this U-shaped tunnel that you see is going to be a half pipe that you roll up and out with the speedball. But if you're playing Metroid Prime for the very first time, you don't know that there is a speedball power-up. You just have this tube. And you might be thinking, based on previous Metroid games, that maybe this has something to do with the ball. Maybe. I mean, it's Metroid Prime. If you're a big fan of Metroid, it's not like you have somehow skipped all the promotional videos for it. So you're probably expecting it's got to be something to do with a ball or something. You make note of it, and it sticks in the back of your mind. And at some point, you're probably going to be back at this location. You don't know when, you don't know how, you don't know why, but you're probably going to be back there. And then you notice other things like there's ledges you can't get to, there's doors that you can see that you can't get to, and at some point you're going to be coming back here. Well, that's something that the medium doesn't do. You don't backtrack. In fact, the medium as a game is very much self-contained and very episodic. Is you finish one puzzle segment and you almost immediately move on to the next puzzle segment. Now, on one hand, this is a great narrative function. It keeps pushing the game forward to follow the story, and I think that's one of the reasons why the medium works, is that the story just doesn't stop ramping. It keeps pushing you further and further and further and further, and you don't ever actually have a chance to go back. But in Silent Hill, going back, I think, is a significant part of it. What was it? Silent Hill, where you're stuck in a room? What was it? Silent Hill 4? Where you have to keep going back to the room, and now I'm actually going to Silent Hill room. What was this? Silent Hill. Yes, Silent Hill 4, the room, where you just kind of keep coming back to the same location, and things you do elsewhere influence what happens there. And that's kind of what I expect from a Silent Hill game, and the medium devs really haven't shown that they can do that. They really haven't shown that they can make world interactions that matter on a Metroidvania scale of interaction. Give me a second. I'm trying to think if I want to hang around this zone until the time changes so I can kill some pirates, or defeat some pirates. I am a vigilante. They're already dead, so it's not like I can kill them twice. Well, I mean, I could, but just defeat them. Anyways, so kind of coming back, kind of try not to lose the medium too far. I'm just not sure that the medium developers are prepared for those kind of challenges, those kind of changes. And yeah, what they made was an experience, and it's a game that I don't regret playing. I think it is a masterpiece of art design, and I really wish more developers had the freedom to make the kind of games that they want to make. And here's it. The medium is a unique experience, and it's one that it doesn't hold punches, for better or for worse, about where the characters are going and decisions that the characters make. Now, to be fair, I haven't gone back and seen if there is an alternate ending, or if the ending that I got is the only ending that there is. And I really am curious if something, I did not see anything that would scream, you do this differently, you can get a different result later. The medium was incredibly linear to play. But it's the kind of game where if I just looked at it on the box art, or looked at screenshots of it, or looked at a video of it being played, I would not have played it. But because it was on Xbox Game Pass, I downloaded it and I played it. And I felt it was worth playing. And I think it's worth telling other people you really should go and play the medium. It's not really much of a game, but it has so many unique ideas in storytelling and progressing a story. That it's the kind of game that you want to support. But it's not the kind of game I would have spent my own money on outside of. But on a subscription service, I was able to spend some money, which did go to developers, which did help fund it, and did help make the game profitable for the developers. That's always good. They can pay their mortgages, pay their rents, pay for food, pay for power. They can keep on making better games, and they can take what they learned from the medium and make something that's even better, maybe capitalize on some of the mechanics that were uh, some of the mechanics that were leveraged. Is leveraged the right word? But that's kind of the point of it, is because of the subscription model, more people got exposed to the medium, had a chance to play the medium, and then could decide whether or not the medium was the kind of game that they were interested in. And that is really the benefit of a subscription model, is that you are paying for the development of content. You are paying developers, maybe indirectly, to create new content. And there's been a flood of indie games on Xbox Games Pass that, if it weren't for them being on Xbox Game Pass, they probably would not have achieved the conversations that they generate. Now, some of those are good, some of those are bad, some of those are stay away from this game, don't believe the marketing, but that is the benefit of a subscription service, and that is how Microsoft appears to be selling the service itself. And that is, again, a grave concern with how Sony is approaching the combination of PlayStation Now and PlayStation Plus. Sony made a lot of terrible choices in PlayStation Plus games as of late, running trial games. And let's face it, if you are paying Sony for a service and their idea of a good thing to respond to your payment with is a trial game, yeah, there's something wrong here. Now, I do know what's going on in Sony. I do know why Sony is making the bad choices that they are making. And it kind of comes back to Ken Kay as the CEO of Sony when the PlayStation 4 launched. Ken Kay was a gamer. He ran Sony as a gamer. And Ken Katargi, am I saying his name right? Ken Katargi. Ken Katarg. This is why I just call him Ken Kay. Ken Kay, Sony CEO. Make sure I got this right. Or is it Cass? Alright, so it was Ken Kay and Cass Harare. So I'm getting my K's mixed up here. Ken Kay and Kaz Harare were basically running Sony Interactive Entertainment and then running Sony. They're gamers. They were approaching things as gamers. And part of the thing is, Kaz Harare is by and large credited for the... Okay, to people on the inside, he is by and large credited as the reason that Spider-Man is in the MCU, because Kaz laid down the law on Sony Pictures and told them, cut a deal with Marvel. And that is something that really wasn't produced. And this is where we kind of have to step back and consider the sheer amount of divisions within Sony, and more importantly, how do certain segments of those business actually work. And a key factor here when it comes to the motion picture industry is that contracts and payments are written obtusely. They're basically written so that if conditionals are met, people get bonuses for meeting conditionals. Not necessarily the cast, mind you. Cast are normally either offered a flat payment, a contractual agreement, or say a net. They may accept a return of net profits or gross profits or whatever in order to play a part. But the crew, the cameramen, the producers, the directors, the actual production and editing staff have other bonuses that are separate from actor contracts. And a number of ways that those uh, employees make money is by qualifying for awards. Not necessarily winning an award, but simply being qualified for an award. If somebody works, if a technical production staff works in a movie and the movie is nominated for 6 or 7 awards for visual editing, then everybody on the visual editing staff gets a bonus because they were at least nominated. If they win an award, if they actually win, then they get an even larger reward. And this is a key factor of the movie business to keep in mind, is that a vast majority of the staff money is not made through the performance of the movie itself, because they are paid by scale from the not necessarily sure it's the Screen Actors Guild, but the associated or workers unions to even work on the property to begin with. They have to join a union of some kind because they are effectively paid by scale. The only way that they can really make money on a production is if they win awards. So let me pose a simple question. What happens if instead of taking over a movie studio, a politically oriented faction takes over an award? They take over the production of award. They take over the decision of who to nominate for the awards, and they take over, say, movie awards, or they take over music awards. In the case of the movie industry, this now means that everybody who is staff on a motion picture, the cameramen, the prop makers, the effects artists, the visual, everyone who has a technical role, who is not in front of the camera but working behind the camera, their bonuses are now contingent to money, how they actually make money contractually, or how they are contractually obligated to make money and receive extra payment, is dependent on whether or not their movie or their work is submitted for an award that is controlled by political interest. This is how the socialists took over the movie industry without actually having to take over the movie industry. And some people call it the Brokeback effect. It's when a movie, everyone knows it's bad, everyone knows it's terrible, but because it has a political message and the award grantors are looking for political messages and awarding political messages, then the not so great movie that everyone rightfully skipped in the box office because it was bad can somehow become a critical and award darling, because that's where the money comes from for the cast and production. The cast and crew now have a vested interest to, well, play along with, yeah, we know our movie was crap, but this is how we get paid. And now you have an extra incentive going onwards that people who have worked on award-winning productions, they can now command higher salaries because, or higher scale rates or greater cost because they worked on an award-winning production or an award-nominated production. And when that happens, you now have a, once again, circular reasoning of logic. You can only get more money by working in this industry by pandering to political interest, but the only way you can keep going forward is to pander to political interest, which keeps giving you more awards, that's getting you higher pay that you only get because you're pandering to political interest. So here comes Kaz Hirare in as Sony CEO, who's telling the picture division, no, you don't focus on your contracts, you focus on making good entertainment. You don't focus on political messages, you focus on good stories. And if you look very closely at the award records, basically as soon as Kaz Hirare takes over the Sony CEO spot and starts laying down the law with Sony Pictures that they must knock off the political messaging, they must knock off financing political messaging, that Sony suddenly disappeared from awards. They weren't producing political messages. And the likes of, what was her name? Amy Pascal, who was responsible for the Ghostbusters 2016 Went Rogue, Went Broke disaster, found herself declawed, muzzled, and stuffed into a closet. Mental imagery intended, considering we're talking about comic books. Or should I say, stuffed in a fridge. Problem is, although that's what Amy Pascal, I believe that's what her name is. Let me double check that. Amy Pascal, Sony Pictures. Yeah, Amy Pascal fired from Sony. She was fired. I'm not really sure what's going on with her now, nor do I particularly care. But keeping that in mind, that the political elements within Sony Pictures were being muzzled, were being taken out of the picture, pun intended, and Sony was being forced to make movies that appealed to a wide demographic, family-friendly movies that actually sold at the box office. I mean, all of us can probably say that the Spider-Man movies of the Kaz Hirare era were just amazing, just completely mind-blowing. None of us could have ever imagined that we'd see a Spider-Man movie that would be better than the Tobey Maguire films, because the Andrew Garfield films were also politically driven. So kind of keeping that in mind, but the thing is, once you have movies that stop being eligible for rewards because they are, or awards, because they are no longer pushing the political messages that the award grantors are looking for, you have a whole host of people inside of Sony who now have a very good reason to want the CEO removed. And not just the CEO, they want anyone the CEO put in power removed as well. Because that CEO, although the movie is now making money, because those employees are not necessarily contractually obligated to make money on the success of a movie, but make money on the success of awards, which are politically determined, you now got a CEO who has, by doing a great job, put a number of employees at financial risk. They are going to lose their mortgages. They are going to lose their houses. They are going to lose everything they worked for, because what they count on to make money, they're not going to be able to make that money, because the award givers are not going to give them an award because they didn't have a political message. Once you figure out the train here of how the award ceremonies are being used to fund, and it's not necessarily fraud, it's not necessarily extortion, but you have a substantial amount of industry people in the movie industry making purchases based on the performance that they think they can get by doing a specific action, not necessarily making a good movie, but by making a politically oriented movie, by making a politically oriented film. They are not getting the financial return that they were expecting simply by playing by the rules that they all understood and were never clarified to anybody outside of the industry. And everyone outside of the industry kind of tilts their head and goes, no. the Academy Awards is not supposed to be about political messaging. It's supposed to be about awarding technical excellence, delivery, the ability to portray a character convincingly. But that's not what the rewards are about anymore. They're about awarding political statements and political messaging. They're about awarding the liberal, leftist, socialist, identity politics agendas. Agendas, plural. So, kind of keeping that back in mind, we can then backtrack that. The upheaval from the rank and file within Sony, who are now effectively being locked out of bonuses, losing property, losing cars, being forced out of their homes, being turned homeless. You might be able to understand why Kaz Hirare, despite being the best CEO Sony had had in decades, was forced out. Because Kaz, despite being a successful CEO who was pushing Sony to greater amounts of profitability, who was pushing Sony forwards as a company, who was helping to push Sony to make legitimately great movies that were entertaining to watch, Kaz Hirare had to go because he was costing the political objectives their cash flow. And we can trace that back around the PlayStation. Because as Kaz Hirare is getting shown to the curb and escorted out of Sony, and those executives under him who were also pushing for entertainment-friendly products, for profitable products, were also shown the door, we begin to get a glimpse of what exactly happened to produce the PlayStation 5 and Sony's current behavior, or lack thereof. The executives who were responsible for making great products aren't there anymore. Or if they are there, they've been put into different roles, or they don't have the push and move that they did. Thus, the software changes, the hardware changes, and everything else are kind of, they're being dictated by people who, aren't necessarily the best judges to be making those decisions, because they're not making those decisions based on things like profit and loss statements. They're making those decisions based on whether or not their game gets a good review score in Vice magazine. Or if they, Out magazine, they get paid extra bonuses whether or not their game has 2 or 3 pages coverage in Out magazine or something else, or some other publication, where the political identity and political posturing matters more than the actual game product. And now we're getting back into boring hunt territory. Am I seriously not going to be able to one-shot these guys? This is going to be frustrating. I'm going to have to start cranking. I think all I need to do is just crank overgrowth. Don't need the others, but I do need that extra damage. Say a lot. There's a substantially large number of banished Pantheon there. Anyways, so going back to Sony has a problem in the executive levels of the company. The executive making the decisions are not necessarily the executives who can be credited with the success of the PlayStation 4. And we've also seen something else from Sony, is we keep seeing reports that Sony has sold more consoles than the Xbox. The slight problem is that developers who do online tracking and account logging in, everyone who tracks a player population for an online segment, their records aren't reconciling with the sales records. I mean, that's not really a big surprise. Now, because Microsoft's gone whole hog on the Games Pass and online play and the cross PC play with Xbox, since Microsoft's kind of gone down that whole big rabbit hole quite thoroughly, developers are saying, who do that kind of tracking, are saying that the Xbox numbers seem to be accurate based on game sale, based on player interaction. The PlayStation numbers do not seem to be adding up. So what's going on? I think we're looking at the same thing that, has happened, in the past on both Sony and Microsoft part. And it's a key distinction in that if you are a product manufacturer, there are two ways that you can count products that leave your factory. You can count products that leave your factory and that are actually sold to an end user, or you can just count the packages that leave the factory. In this case, it's known as the items shipped. Now, in the past, both Sony and Microsoft have counted packages that were shipped as packages that were sold. Now, this is technically not actually a lie, because in the retail business, if you are shipping to a retailer like Amazon or Walmart or Target or Costco, the retailer is paying a price up front to get the product that you are selling. So Costco pays for PlayStations in advance. And then after the PlayStation sells at the MSRP, manufactured suggested retail price point, once the item has sold, then the retailer sends money back to the retailer, whoever they bought the money from. Or if they have already paid in percentage of the console or device up front, the money that the retailer spends, they spend it all up front, and then that is just reclaiming the cost that they've already sunk into the product. Now, the key thing to keep in mind here is that the MSRP is designed or often calculated with a number of factors in mind. Those factors are the cost in shipping. How much is it actually going to cost to get the product from point A to point B? Now, if you are a company like Anchor and you do a lot of pre-sales, pre-orders, then you can vastly simplify your shipping logistics. If you know that you have 5,000 people buying your product in Georgia, 2,000 people buying your product in Alabama, 1,700 buying your product in Tennessee, and 400 people buying your product in Florida, then you can arrange your shipping ahead of time so that you can either direct ship the products, or you can arrange your shipping patterns so that these products have to spend the least amount of time sitting in a warehouse, if they sit in a warehouse at all. These kind of pre-sales mean that you can save a metric ton of money in not just shipping fuel costs. Where are you sending this product? How are you sending this product? You can also save a metric ton in terms of warehousing. How much does it cost to store this? Where is this product physically going to be stored? And those are pretty big items to have a massive percentage cut down on. If you can basically knock off 30% of your shipping costs out front because of a pre-order system, then you've saved, potentially speaking, depending on the scale of your product and how many people have bought it, you could possibly even save millions of dollars, and you can just take that money that you saved right off of the product itself. And that is a very good business model, and there's a number of vendors who do that. A lot of vendors who work on Indiegogo or Kickstarter who have other established business, by pre-selling a product through a crowdfunding source, they can manage their logistics and save a significant amount of money that then otherwise have to be determined and calculated into the MSRP to put it on a store shelf so that it can be bought at a later date, sitting on a shelf somewhere, undetermined. So that's the kind of construct to keep in mind here, and that from a vendor's perspective, if Sony sells 5 million consoles to retailers, to the middlemen, then Sony sold that number of consoles. But if the retailers only sell half of those consoles, then the number of consoles that are actually in the market are far less. Now, since Sony does not necessarily make public who the middlemen are, what the allocations are for the various retailers or warehousing or whoever stand between Sony's factories and the actual production of the warehouse, Sony can legitimately come up and say, we've sold 5 million units. And technically, they have. They have sold 5 million units. They have received the money from those 5 million units. They have received that because they've been prepaid up front by the middlemen. But if the middlemen don't actually sell the console, if it's caught by scalpers who hang on to it, the middleman gets a higher amount of money, or the middleman sits on the console because they can get a higher price point out of scalpers who are willing to pay extra off of the record for the console, then Sony hasn't actually sold that many consoles. Now, this is in this market where restocks are being tracked and shipping is being tracked. You would think it would be very hard to disguise console numbers, because everyone's like, when are the shipments coming? How many consoles are being produced? So it's strange then that in this market that what developers are saying Sony's not producing, the number of consoles they say that are selling, the number of consoles that are estimated to be selling, aren't matching up with what consumers are actually buying or playing or approaching in a trackable format. And like I said, this is really nothing new. Both Sony and Microsoft have done this in the past, where they have claimed that their various console has sold X number, but it hasn't actually sold X number of consoles because they were counting what were known as shipped numbers. Sony and Microsoft counted the number of consoles that had been shipped out of the factory, not necessarily the number of consoles that had actually been shipped to an end client. Now, in the case of Microsoft, and this was a significant point during the GameCube and original Xbox era, Microsoft actually had to go back before trade commissions in a number of countries and restate the number of Xbox consoles that were sold, because they had flat out lied. And this is an interesting bit of trivia. Original Xbox never outsold the GameCube. It never did. Microsoft said it did, and then, keeping in mind this is the Gates-Ballmer era Microsoft had to go back and then restate to the relevant trade industries, who were like, well, if you did outsell the GameCube, where's the money from this? And Microsoft had to, the lawyers had to admit, well, okay, no, we didn't actually sell that many. That's how many we shipped to ODMs, and because we are under a not subscription, subsidizing. because we are subsidizing the cost of the console, we are selling the console to vendors, to our retailers for less, and then once the console sells, then they pay us a percentage of the money back so that we can get more consoles out there, and the retailers are not as much money. They are not out the full MSRP or the full price that we sell them, because we're subsidizing the cost of the console. And that's the kind of thing that, well, okay, does draw regulatory attention. And that's the kind of thing that's really going on with Sony right now, is the numbers aren't matching up. Now, are they matching up in a way that suggests that Sony is subsidizing the console, or are they matching up in a way that suggests that Sony is working with scammers and working with scalpers to deliberately place PlayStation 5 consoles in the hands of people who are using it for get-rich-quick schemes? I think the financial evidence would suggest that Sony's not being truthful about who the middlemen are and how many consoles are actually being warehoused. Now, that being said, I think some of the retailers may also be inflating numbers for a kickback, because again, nothing new. This has been done before. It's something Sony's been very good at in the past, and it was a practice that for the most part Casuarare put an end to, and one of the reasons why the PlayStation 4 was a resounding success, and that the PlayStation 4 under Casuarare as Sony CEO didn't have these kinds of stock games played. It didn't have this kind of issues. It was however many consoles we've sold is however many consoles we've sold. We're shipping straight to the retailers, and we're not playing games with subsidizing. We're just selling the console at the price that the console costs. We're not overinflating the cost. And that was one of the big reasons why the PlayStation 4 was such a big success, is the Casuarare, as a gamer, put the kibosh on all of the games that were being played on the back end, the games that resulted in the PlayStation 3 being a questionable product with multiple hardware iterations to work around some pretty big thermal and performance issues. So kind of keeping that in mind, keeping in mind the political track record, and that the person who was responsible for basically turning Sony from a questionable performer into the company that did what it said it was going to do. We kind of have to look at the current Sony, the current CEO, the current people running PlayStation, and realize that most of these people are in it for a political purpose. They get a kickback, they get a reward, they get something for making political statements. And I think this is also why we get the disaster that was Last of Us Part 2, which is an absolutely atrociously bad game. And there have been better breakdowns than I will ever do on why Last of Us 2 sucks. But basically, it's a game that has to make a political statement, so it makes that political statement by direction from above, editorial interference, which, well, every time that happens in comic books, it almost never ends well. Definitely wasn't going to happen in a game, and really think Naughty Dog should be ashamed of letting it end like that. But after listening to the head writer's reasons for why Last of Us Part 2 is atrociously bad, maybe it's a good thing that it's just accepted as being atrociously bad. Anyway, so, and I realized I got way away from the subscription services, but that's a critical, it is the placement of the people who are in charge and what their overall objective is. Microsoft still has a very big problem with go woke, go broke syndrome at the top end. Microsoft still has a very big problem with executives from the Gates and Ballmer era still thinking that identifying computers by the processors is a good idea. You still have executives who think that the TPM modules are a good idea. Now, to some extent, there are some valid arguments to be made about securing the boot chain. TPM modules are not that method. There are better methods, there are better implemented methods, and I think that was a strong case in case of Windows 11, a very big case of not invented here syndrome, since Linux had basically taken the lead on securing the boot chain by using tools that were available that gave power to the user. Microsoft, of course, couldn't do that. But on the other hand, over on the Xbox side, you got Phil Spencer, who is just knocking it out of the park because he's a gamer and he understands that a good game or a bad game delayed can be a good game eventually. A good game on time is still a good game. A bad game rushed may never be a good game. And Phil Spencer also seems to understand that content is king. It's having compelling content, something that people actually want to play, a story that gamers will enjoy, and a way to access that content. Wrapping up the Xbox in the Xbox Games Pass with the Xbox Game Pass Ultimate purchase, buy the service will send you a console and then you can upgrade the console. Brilliant idea. Implementation on Microsoft's part. And it really shows the schizophrenic difference between the executives who still hold some sway on the Windows processing side and the Xbox division who keeps giving reason after reason why Phil Spencer will probably be the next CEO of Microsoft. I think Satya Nadella may make that call, and that may be a rude awakening for the rest of the Gates and Ballmer era, who, okay, thankfully many of them are getting older, and thankfully due to the more egregious go woke efforts of Twitter, Facebook, and other service providers, getting the go woke, go broke crowd to seek employment at Microsoft is basically an uphill climb. You've got a number of older executives who will basically do anything Bill Gates tells them to do still, because that's how they made their money and they know who signed their paychecks for so long. And for many of them, they are very much invested in that political market. But on the other hand, you've got people who came into Microsoft trying to run an actual business, and Phil Spencer, from all outside appearances, seems dead set on running Xbox as a business. They're in it to make money, not lose money. They're not a loss leader. They're a what problems can we solve? How can we solve them? And this is why I'm pretty sure as we get closer to the Steam Deck launch, you're probably going to see an official Steam Deck Xbox Game Pass client, and every game that's on Xbox Game Pass being verified to work under Proton on the Steam Deck. Because Phil Spencer's in it for the money. If you buy a Steam Deck and you still need to buy an Xbox Game Pass Ultimate to play Xbox Game Pass games, then that's still a sale, that's still profit, that's still money rolling in, that's still an expansion of the subscription model that's paying for content development. So that's where I'm pretty sure we are going to see that very quickly. I really don't know how quickly, but Phil Spencer is in it to make money. He's in it to run Xbox as a business. Now, as far as the rest of the company, I do believe that Satya Nadella is in it to run Microsoft as a profit-oriented company. Not a politically oriented company, but a number of the Microsoft executives, the vice presidents in charge of various divisions, the mid-level managers, the career men who have been there, the coders who have been there since Bill Gates was there, they have a vested interest in status quo. Well, the status quo is slowly breaking, and there's nothing that the Go Woke Grow Broke crowd can do to stop that. And the more the Go Woke Go Broke crowd gets obnoxious about the political messaging, the easier it is to prove demonstratively that they are not an economical force. They hold no economic power. They cannot make or break the success of a product. They can, the opposite side, however, the foundationalist side, the conservative side, whatever you want to call it, does have substantial economic power. This can actually be seen in real time over on Gab and the Gab marketplace, where there are literally billions of dollars already flowing through Gab's parallel economy because Gab's not clamping down and censoring political speech. There are people who are able to sell products and services on Gab Marketplace that they can't sell elsewhere because their political speech is being censored. Now, I realize I'm saying this on YouTube, which has a number of algorithms, and I feel quite confident in saying that no matter what I do, this particular stream will never be promoted into anybody else's channel, but I'm okay with that. It's at least practice, at least give me something to work on my vocal cords with. Because I actually have been, how long have I been talking? Oh, we are over an hour, I think, of just monologuing. And my voice hasn't, well, it's starting to crack, so yes, improvements! Yes, I have a face for radio. And a voice. I've been told by a number of people who have watched this that I have a nice voice, and kind of tilt my head and go, what, really? I know that my voice careens all over the place. Someone was starting up in Eden. I don't know how long ago it was because I wasn't looking at the chat. I already started. Oh well. Alright, I really should pause the stream then and get something to drink. Oh, when did I get cold-blooded? Oh. Okay, it was not even a circuit ago. Okay. I must have gotten cold-blooded. I sort of like, yes, I know I could stop the stream, go back, and watch the video through. I'm not narcissistic enough to want to listen to myself again. So we'll finish out the zone. And then we'll pause for station identification. And we'll be right back after these messages. Yeah, like I have a sponsor. Who would sponsor this rambling? ExpressVPN? Maybe. Yeah, okay, I know there's been a bit of pushback on VPNs recently, and a push for sites to use HTTPS. I guess the best way I can say this is that if you do not want your ISP, your internet service provider, to know what you're up to, then a VPN a virtual private network is probably a really good idea. If you don't care if your internet service provider knows exactly what you're up to, then a VPN probably isn't going to be of much use. And the reason for that is At some point, your traffic will have to go onto the backbone. There are various methods to identify a computer using tracked methods. One have been GPU imprinting. Another one have been audio imprinting. If you have a microphone that is turned on and active, or a website or application can access that microphone, uh, then your speaker may be used to generate an ultrasonic sound outside of human hearing, which can then be picked up by the microphone and explicitly identify which computer you are at and your identity based on the ultrasonic tones in which your microphone is capable of picking up. No, this is not theory. Some advertisers have already been caught using this kind of technology. Well, I wouldn't really say it technology. I would really say it's an implementation of a technology. Yes, I got that. Get this one. So anyways, and from the other side of it, if you have a significant enough fingerprint that a government entity might be able to identify you, a VPN might not offer enough extrapolation or separation from where you're at and what you're doing to defend you against a nosy government. So, for the most part, a VPN isn't going to protect you against somebody who's really got it in to find out where you are and what you're up to. Now, that being said, a VPN can help delay the process behind, or even better, if you are using a proxy of your own and you go through a known IP address, and then route it backwards from there, either then through a VPN or through an onion router, which is, well, still technically a private network of some sorts. So yes, if you are trying to run from a government, you are probably going to be taking more steps than just step one, enable VPN. If you are trying to hide from advertisers, well, they've already got enough sneaky tricks that just running an ad blocker and blocking the ad to begin with is going to carry you oh so much further. Using a browser that has default permissions closed off, say like Vivaldi or Opera, will also go a long way towards protecting your identity online or annoying advertisers that they can't get a good read on you. And another factor to kind of keep in mind from a security standpoint is that while VPNs have limited usage, there are specific points where they are useful for, say, passing region blocks, where some websites or some services that could make an effort and better determine where you are at simply don't make that effort because they don't have a financial interest to do so. Netflix does not have a financial interest to figure out the exact IP address and geographical location of everyone who watches Netflix. They do have a vested interest in as many Netflix subscribers as possible, which, if you have a vested interest in the number of people watching your service as possible, you don't make political messaging, and you definitely don't hire a former president as a content advisor who is a socialist. That's how you destroy your economic base. That's not how you improve it, but that's a subject that has been also done to death elsewhere. I really don't have anything to add to the subject, but that is why Netflix and other content providers will not be disabling users who are running through a VPN, because they do kind of count on or ostensibly count on the subscriber money in order to fund whatever their objectives are. If they start turning off VPN users, well, then they turn off their clientele base, and content producers, content sharers generally don't want to do that. So that is one of the reasons I think why, well, it would make economical sense why VPNs can pay for people to advertise the getting around regional blocks, because that's how the content providers really get their money, is by selling services, and the more people they can have on the service, the better they are. If they can sell you service and you are not in a country where that service is technically legal or allowed due to copyright or some form of fair use abuse, well, then great. They've still made a sale. They don't care. So that's just since I'm going down that route. It's okay. Coming back to legitimately, who would actually sponsor something like this? Well, uh, most of the time, as evidenced by a number of YouTube channels, it's generally the people who watch it. Do you like the content that I make? Do my sudden spear offs into political theory interest you? Uh, do you just like seeing just random games being brought up and instructions on how to play the game or get the most of that game? Or just like where I'm today going after badges and just, well, what just crossed my mind? What just made me think of something? And then going off on that tangent is the kind of content that is like I like political oriented shows where somebody is able to convincingly argue a point and then give people enough research items where they can go, hang on, that doesn't add up, or wait a second, that adds up. But then I just don't have the, how can I say this? The desire to sit in front of a microphone and just bring up newsfeed after newsfeed and comment on the newsfeed. I'd rather be doing something with my time. So hence, that's where we are. And right now, where I am is sitting on top of a day job badge location. So I'm going to cut it here. We are at an hour and 31 minutes. I've probably spent like a solid hour of this monologuing. So we'll let it go here.